We have Noah, we have Josh here, and yeah, again, thanks for coming through. All right, cool.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. We are about to embark on an exclusive interview and conversation with two members of the legendary neo-psych outfit Animal Collective. We have Deakin here, we have Panda Bear with us as well. We're going to be talking about not just their new record, Isn't It Now, which is out now, but also hoping in the midst of this conversation to get a bit of a retrospective too on their feelings about the band's progression and creative output over the years, given that it's been well over 2 decades at this point with you guys as a band. But before we kick any of that off, I just want to thank both of you for coming through and making the time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, indeed.
All right. So Isn't It Now is out. I mean, in your, sort of like view, what do you feel like the reception of the record has been so far? Are you happy with how it's being taken, or do you feel like you've been sort of at this for so long that whatever the reception of a certain album is, it's like completely unfazing you at this point, and there's, just kind of a maybe a lack of interest in that generally, just because you guys are going to do what you're going to do regardless of how people are kind of liking, hating, or, engaging with the new material?
I feel like I stopped trying to guess.
Yeah.
Because I've been wrong so many times, and I feel like it hurts worse when you think people are going to like it and they don't. But if I'm honest, I'm a little surprised. I feel like this one's better than the last one, and the reception to the last one seems to be better. But what do you think, Josh?
Well, I was just kind of similarly, I feel unfazed would be the wrong way to put it. I definitely think it's affecting us, but I do feel like I put the most stock on how we feel about something. And I think all four of us, I kind of can speak for Dave and Brian as well. I mean, this is one of my favorite things we've done. So I feel really good about it. And on some level, that's kind of like the fact that the four of us feel that is sort of trumps everything else.
Is there any...
Yeah, I think I echo Noah's feeling. I think there's a little bit of like both records feel really important to me, and they feel very linked. They're kind of like sister brother records to me, and that's kind of unavoidable because of how they came together. But I think that there's something about the execution of this one and the sort of the depth of spirit in it that feels like even more where I would have wanted, all this to go. So it feels like very like we hit it, but it's hard to control how that feels for other people. I mean, I know from paying a bit of attention to like kind of what our more kind of hardcore fan base feels about it. They seem to similarly, I would say on the whole, feel similarly, which is a nice feeling to realize that. I mean, I think at a certain point, having been at this for so long and knowing that, I think I'm kind of quoting Brian on this one, like knowing that we're not really indie darlings anymore. It's like, this is kind of for the fans. Like we're not, the idea that we're going to like kind of break the internet with anything we put out seems like a foolish kind of tilting at windmills kind of thing at this point. So I think it's just making things that we feel really psyched about and know that the people that kind of have embraced our constant left turns and diversions and kind of accepted this world that we've created. I mean, that's what's important to me. And
also sometimes things take time. I feel like I've seen it where the initial reaction it changes over time and it sort of settles into a thing, both going positive to negative and negative to positive. So you never know. It's okay for things to like take time for people to kind of wrap their heads around it. That happens sometimes too.
I think we do something that's, obvious at this point, but I think is really interesting, which is that by changing lanes pretty much every record, and even these two records, even though they are linked, I think because of the production and how they were made, I think they do feel different to people. It's sort of even for our fans, like I do kind of pay attention to sort of their processing of things in real time as much as I can through the boards and stuff. And they kind of are aware that like there's like a wrapping your head around it moment that people have to do, because it's not like, oh, like Animal Collective records always sound like the same thing. And it's more of that. It's like, wait, what are they doing now? And I think it kind of, I like that because I think it challenges people. And I think that the kind of fan base that we are cultivating is one that would kind of be interested in things that sort of make their make them have to think about things in a new way. But this record requires a lot of patience. I mean, it's a 22-minute long song on there. There's 10-minute long songs. Like it's a patient record, and it's sort of asking people to have to like sit with it for a bit. And it's not like an instant thing. And I kind of know
not
that
everybody's down for that.
Yeah. I mean, you guys have in a very short period, like just kind of run through like so many things I wanted to touch down on. It's kind of hard to think about like which one to take on first, but maybe since you just mentioned it, let's like talk about the fact that there is like such a massive song on this record, and that there is like almost such an improvisational, approach to a lot of the material on this LP. You guys have lived through several different, eras of music consumption as fans and as artists. And, I guess like, what drove you to sort of create such material on this new LP, despite the fact that like, we're currently living in an era of music consumption that creatively, and I would say financially, is almost like unforgiving toward such long and experimental music. It's like you're getting off of a stream of that track the same amount of, money or sort of like, internet engagement that you would with somebody who's like putting out a 2-minute song. You know what I mean? It almost like sort of disincentivizes that kind of creativity, unfortunately, so it's like, what about that? I guess like what currently sort of like drove you guys to go in that direction, despite it being, I guess, not as maybe favored or I guess supported by the way the industry currently runs?
I think just following the same kind of instinct that we've had since we were like before we were anything. I think we've never benefited from trying to figure out what we're supposed to do. And I think that kind of is so antithetical to like why we make music and where it comes from. And I just think this is an organic, natural, this is, Defeat was what Dave needed to write at this time in his life, or in 2018 when he wrote it.
Right.
And I just think
it's kind of like at least to me, and I think Josh would agree, it's sort of like the foundation of both the time skip stuff and all these songs. It was sort of like the first thing that I think we all sort of felt like set the tone for the rest of it. Like everything else was sort of built around Defeat.
That makes sense.
But I think that the formula that has both worked for us in, if you want to look at it from that perspective in the aughts, is no different than the formula that we do now, which is just to follow our own instinct. And, there certainly was like a period where obviously history shows that a lot of choices we made just seemed to catch in a way but it wasn't by design. We weren't trying to get people to pay attention in that way or trying to kind of like hit any sort of markers. We weren't, it's just sort of what we felt like making at the time. And I think that just has continued. And so we don't really put that kind of thought into like what a record is going to be, or if this is a time to be making a 22-minute long song or any of that. I mean, I think it's just what feels good.
Yeah, no. To your point, I mean, over the course of the band's career, it would seem that you guys have remained pretty unfazed by like outside pressures. Be that like fan responses or, maybe what record labels or the indie music industry might demand or incentivize. I mean, again, it seems that way from the outside. Is it as true, or is that the case on the ground? Are there moments where you guys have ever felt like, due to certain pressures, maybe you're second guessing?
I mean, the closest we come to that is, every record cycle, there's, some requests for like, radio edits, hey, this song like could be a single if we could chop off the 45 minutes of drone you have at the beginning of it. Like, would you be willing to do that? And we generally have historically always said no to those types of things. But there are probably versions of that kind of stuff that are, I think, kind of more minor details that we're periodically just like, like we don't particularly love the long extended singles rollout that labels like to do these days. And, caveat to this is that Domino's great. We have a great relationship with them. So there is friction around this, but it's not like I really feel like they're on our side. But that's just a thing where we just like, we don't really get it. This idea of like, you put out a single 4 months before a record comes out and then you do another one. And it feels really protracted and annoying to us, but it's sort of, it's what we kind of have to do, or, we'll say no to a point, or we'll be like, cool, we'll give you a single, put out Defeat. And they'll kind of be like, oh, all right, cool. So
I mean, bold choice, though. I mean, bold choice. and honestly respectable too. And I mean, in the rollout of the record, that was personally my favorite sort of like thing that came out of it. You know, it's like in the lead up anyway, it was surprising. And I think a song that long, for anybody who really cares about what you guys do, that's going to make people stand up at attention. You know, like you kind of have to listen to the 21-minute Animal Collective song.
Sure. Yeah, but you know, your question was like, what was your exact question? It was like,
Oh no, I mean, I think you more or less answered it in terms of like, you know, whether or not certain things kind of influence your behavior in terms of what you output or anything like that. But I mean, you know, speaking to the idea of like edits or singles, like, you know, I guess like kind of what drove the release of the single version Soul Capture as opposed to like, you know, what you guys did with it as you know, an intro track on the, you know, standard edition of the record. You know, with
that was an example. That was an example of what I'm saying. We were. It was pointed out to us that it would be really great to get playlisted, and that 20-second intro might be the difference between something getting playlisted or not. Would we be willing to? And so we were just like, you know what, fine. I think that may literally be the first time in 25 years that we've said yes to that. I don't. Maybe Noah has a different memory, but
right.
No, I think we know we make it difficult on Domino, or like we do a lot of stuff that maybe they're not super happy about. So stuff like that. I mean, we recognize that they're all working towards the same thing that we are. So I feel like we try to throw them a bone every once in a while.
Noah, in terms of like a lot of the album rollout stuff, I mean, do you echo a lot of what Josh is saying, especially considering like you also have a lot of individual experience with this, with you know, your solo output being as, I guess, kind of viral or as in demand as it was at certain points in the music industry. Like I personally, you know, given what Josh was just saying, remember like how tumultuous like the rollout for Tomboy was, for example, in certain tracks and like material from the record leaking long beforehand, and, you know, that creating like, you know, some, you know, I guess some static, some tension around that.
Yeah, I mean, usually I feel like I'm more cavalier with that stuff than the band is a little more like guarded about stuff. I'm usually, after I finish the music, the label's like, we want to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm kind of just like, have at it. But I also like respect everybody in the group and what they want to do and how they want to do it. So it's always a bit of like push and pull and conversations and trying to figure out something that everybody, not just the group, but also everybody at Domino and everybody who's working on the record feels good about, and just trying to find some spot in the middle between everybody.
I wanted to ask, just because I think Deacon was kind of inferring this a little bit earlier, you know, but before we kind of go back to some of the much older material, I wanted to kind of dive into whether or not you guys feel like the new record, Time Skiffs, and the 2020s in general have provided maybe an ability for the band to kind of like hit a bit of a reset and, you know, embrace some different instrumental palettes, approach things artistically in a different way. It sort of seems like we're at the beginning of a new chapter or era for the band. And I want to know if, like, in your own view, is that actually the case?
I think it feels like that. Maybe the last one was Centipede Hurts. So there's sort of like 10-year chunks, I guess, for us. And maybe this feels like, I mean, it's kind of hard to say because it feels like we're kind of right at the crossroads or something. But it does, I do kind of have the sense that this is sort of like the third chapter or something.
Right. Well, I mean, since you kind of opened the door by mentioning Centipede, like, you know, how do you guys feel retrospectively at this point about the band's 2010s output? Because, you know, I feel like the reception to a lot of those records at the time that they were released wasn't necessarily the most positive, mostly because like you had a lot of comparisons being drawn directly to like your most successful and viral output, with it having, you know, been so recent at the time. Do you feel like the receptions of those records have changed at all over the years, with people maybe having the ability to consume them outside of the context of like, oh yeah, this is coming right after this, and now there's expectations that the band sounds this way or they do this or make this kind of song or this kind of single?
Yeah, to me, Centipede Hurts is sort of the biggest example of when I was talking earlier about, I feel like some records sort of take some time to kind of, for people to sort of wrap their heads around. And it does, at least like talking to fans at shows and stuff like that or like signing records. It's kind of a silly example, but it is sort of an indicator of stuff that they're excited about. And I feel like that one gets way more play than it certainly at the time it did. People seemed to really hate it when it came out.
Have you personally been able to notice any difference in terms of like, is it growing on people that may have been aware of it at the time, or are younger fans? Because, obviously your brand as a band is still kind of enduring and people are kind of finding out about you guys all the time. Are there people who are new to the group who are taking that album in a different context, given that they're not sort of like, being introduced to it, having waited for it after Meriwether necessarily?
Yeah,
I think that's true for both Centipede Hurts and
Sorry,
Painting With. I think no, I cut you. I mean, yeah, I think it's true for both of the kind of primary 2010s records. I think Centipede Hurts and Painting With both have fans that came to us through those records, and in some ways those are the ones that they hold as a touchstone, even if they're kind of aware that there's this like, quote unquote golden era of like aughts releases. I think they're like, that's when it hit for me. And so yeah, I do. I think that's kind of what I was saying before about feeling the sort of sense of like, because we sort of change every time, and that somehow worked for us, like from Sung Tongs to Merriweather, like each of those records do feel equally as different to me, but people sort of embraced that trajectory and then started getting thrown by it, starting with Centipede and then with Painting With, and with this new stuff too. I mean, I see people being like, why, like, I miss all like the crazy synths. Like, why don't another like Painting With record? And you're just like, right. But it's just like I've sort of noticed that even within our fan base, I feel like there's this really interesting thing of like having cultivated a fan base that doesn't necessarily agree with itself, which is sort of funny. Like, I don't know if other bands have that. It's like everything that we've done has somebody who like champions that. There's people that are like, Tangerine Reef is one of the best things they think we've done since like the early aughts, and you're just like, right, so there's that person, and they don't get like this side of us. They don't understand Painting With, but Tangerine Reef makes sense to them, and somebody else that feels, which is wild. I think it's really interesting to kind of have that I think that
perspective.
Yeah. I think the reason I don't know if this like I think like with all like this talk of like, things not landing, I think the one that stings for me the most with that stuff is actually just when people like the narrative or the accusation is that like it was phoned in, or like we weren't trying very hard, or we didn't care about it or something like that. I feel like that's the one where I'm just like, man, like I having been in the trenches with what we do for all this time and knowing where our spirits are at with stuff, it's just like we put all of ourselves into everything we do. And so I think when so I like that part of it. I like the part that you get to realize like, oh, that person gets Tangerine Reef and they understand why it was made, and it doesn't feel like a lazy record to them. It feels like they get what it's for, and the same is true with Centipede or whatever. So
I mean, you do have those polarizing and divisive opinions among the fan base about certain albums, but simultaneously, like, in my experience reviewing and talking about and covering music for over a decade now, I feel like there's few fan bases that go to bat for you guys as hard as, well, I mean, again, as you. I feel like there are a few fan bases that go to bat as hard for their favorite artist as like the Animal Collective fan base. Like, to what do you feel like that could be attributed to, and would you agree with that assessment?
I know what you mean with certain people. I mean, for sure. It's hard for me. I think being in the center of it, it's interesting for me to look at everything from message board comments to talking to fans after shows to reading, Pitchfork and Exclaim reviews or whatever, and or the whatever. Like, to sort of really understand what's actually happening, I don't really feel like it's my place to say, but I do. Yeah, I'd
hope that it comes from a place where the people feel like their relationship with the music is so personal that any attack on the music feels like an attack on them. It's sort of like sports teams or sports franchises when people argue online about the Celtics or whatever, and people get so angry when their team is getting attacked because it becomes sort of like an extension of them. I'd hope that our fans experience something like that. I mean, I feel like at least on our end, we're trying to imbue the music with some sort of really personal expression. So hopefully that kind of gets translated on the other side. And if it does, Maybe that's why people feel so get so up in arms when people criticize us.
You know, I feel like there's an interesting flip side to that I would like to know your thoughts on, because while, you know, for you guys and a lot of different artists, you know, some fans will come to the defense of a certain record or a certain, you know, act based on whatever the criticism is, but also there can be conversely like gatekeeping, which, you know, I remember very vividly around the time that like Meriwether Post Pavilion came out. There were all these think pieces about, you know, who you guys are and how to get into your music. And there was almost this prevailing narrative that like, oh yeah, if Meriwether's your favorite one, you're a poser. You're not an actual fan. Like, you know, you're not really into Animal Collective. But now that that album has aged and, you know, people are getting into the band in a variety of different ways, like, you know, what are your thoughts on like such opinions? And I guess like, you know, I guess the tendency of some fans to kind of like maybe try to keep the band kind of hidden or kind of control like who has access to them or who doesn't, because maybe it would like, you know, the perception that it would ruin the community or something like that.
Hate it.
Yeah.
I think it's total fucking bullshit. Yeah, I don't like it.
Agreed. And I don't think much more needs to be said about it other than that. But like, you know, with that being said, and considering like, you know, you've had these various points of like, you know, commercial success and, you know, albums that maybe left fans scratching their heads more and furthermore having to kind of, or not having to, but also having changed the sound of the group, album to album. You know, in your personal opinions, each of you, is there a certain record or set of records that you think kind of effectively work as an entry point for the band? Maybe, you know, given that there is so much variety across the discography.
I would go with this one because I always lean towards the new one. Maybe Strawberry Jam. People seem to really like that one. And,
that's kind of one I reach to a lot. Like when with this, I mean, I've been asked this question before, and it's not necessarily that I think it's like my favorite or anything like that, but I think that it sort of bridges a lot of the different things that we've done over the years. Like I sort of feel like in some ways it's sort of like close to the most representative or something of like the scope on some level. I mean, that's like, not truly accurate, but it's like it sort of feels, yeah, I don't know. It feels like it's a glue that you can kind of like point to a bunch of different stuff. You can see where Meriwether's going. You can see where Feels came from. You can see where like something like Time Skiffs or Isn't It Now would eventually like, yeah, like I feel like they're all kind of in there in some way. So
Oddsack is pretty good.
Shout out to Oddsack.
Oddsack might, on reflection, it might be my number one. I feel like that has a little bit of everything in there.
And,
yeah, that's true.
I mean, you know, is there, I guess, anything about these projects that, you know, I guess what I want to ask in response to that is like, is there a certain definable essence to Animal Collective that you feel like those albums represent in a way? You know, is it a certain sound or a certain vibe or certain energy or certain world that those projects are creating that is you know, something that like the band represents in a way?
No, not really. Not to me. I think it's more about representing that the thing is kind of in flux all the time. I think that's sort of the thing that I'd like to get across to somebody who doesn't know anything.
Josh?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe similar answer. I think the thing that gets frustrating with anybody's fixation on any one record, and in a way, Meriwether being like the primest example, that like that's the sound of Animal Collective, or that Sung Tongs is the sound of Animal Collective, because I've never thought that. I mean, the music that we make and you know, primarily being around like the songwriting that Noah and Dave does, which I've been privy to since I was 13, 14, 15 years old. You know, there's something about it that does transcend any sort of style or approach musically or lineup or anything that I feel like has a lot more to do with exploration and a certain relationship to spirit and like reflection on life at a given moment. Like those are the things to me that are like the true kind of like beating heart of the group. And I think that's much more than like, is this a guitar record or a sample record, or, you know, is there harmonizing, or, you know, like that stuff to me is that's like the icing, you know. I mean, it's a huge part of it, obviously, but it doesn't feel like it's the thing, I guess.
You know, opinions of particular albums aside, positive, negative, whatever, like, you know, be it among the fans, the blogs, websites like Pitchfork, which obviously you guys, you know, a lot of their coverage was pretty integral to, you know, exposure to your music. Like, do you generally agree with the broad interpretation of the band over the years? Again, you know, like opinions of specific records aside, the labeling of like you guys as a psychedelic act, an experimental act, this act, that act, like, you know, do you feel like at the heart of it all, at the end of the day, the audience and, you know, people generally covering your music have kind of got it? Or to you guys, do these labels just make no sense and they're just kind of convenient and, you know, just like jargon filled and a way for people to just kind of like, you know, push people towards something that they might enjoy?
It's more the latter, I think, for me. More closer to the latter, but not, I wouldn't say entirely. I mean, I feel like sometimes I'll see something or read something that feels pretty good, pretty accurate. But also, it seems like over time we've sort of been lumped in with a bunch of different things like freak folk and indie sleaze or something like that. And that stuff doesn't make a lot of sense to me, especially because it's like changed. It hasn't been sort of the same bin that we've been thrown in the whole time. But I understand why that can be useful for people, and how that can allow a group to kind of grow and find new people. Like, I get why people do it, but
yeah, I mean, like
more often than not, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Like during the point of a lot of the coverage around your 2000s run, there was almost like this inference that you guys were a part of like a scene in this world that would often be tagged along with artists like Black Dice and Ye Sayer and Gang Gang Dance and so on and so forth. Like, you know, did you guys actually feel a part of anything in that way, or was that just some kind of narrative that was being pulled together at the time?
I mean, I think in community wise, in terms of we Black Dice remain good friends, and we shared practice spaces together and toured together, and Gang Gang Dance similarly. So there's certainly like groups that I think we felt aligned with, in terms of like an energy and like but you know, at the same time, like, you know, what are the actual sonic, you know, comparisons between us and Black Dice? I mean, you know, they're there, but it's a pretty big gap on some level. So I don't know. And yes and no.
I feel like as far as I've seen, at least I haven't seen too many people talk about what I feel like we thought was our kind of community or like group of bands. Like I haven't seen lines drawn between us and something like Lightning Bolt or perhaps more recently something like Death Grips. But I mean, we weren't like touring with them, but I feel like sonically there's sort of like connections that I'm not sure I've seen drawn so much.
I mean, you know, speaking of, I guess like Death Grips and things that came after you guys, generally speaking, you know, obviously that scene of music that we were just talking about, and, you know, the whole world of indie that was covered so heavily by those blogs and by Pitchfork that I was just mentioning, with that having kind of like come and gone in a sense, like what else outside of, you know, Death Grips, groups like that, do you feel like are kind of carrying the torch for that musical world, or a lot of what you guys were kind of pioneering in the 2000s?
I don't know if I have a good answer for this, to be honest with you. Not even because there doesn't exist, more just because I don't know, my brain doesn't work that way. I
mean, I feel like all the times I've heard somebody say like, these guys sound like you, or it's always like one record or like you know, a short period of time for us or something, or like one sort of idea that I feel like we were looking at that maybe we kind of got tired of or something like that. I don't feel like there's been anything that there's certainly never been anything that I felt like they were just like ripping us off entirely.
And I guess let's move on to some of the aesthetics on the new record, because one of the things that I wanted to get into was with this and Time Skiffs, there's such a larger emphasis on, I guess what you could say are like live drums and live instrumentation generally. And this, obviously comes after an era of a lot of, albums that are so heavy, and not that this record doesn't have its share of effects or studio trickery, but, maybe even more so in the past, and samples and more electronics. Like, what sort of drove you guys to kind of strip things back a little bit on these new records and maybe go for a sound that's like a little more organic and maybe more traditional, and calling back to some of the artists who might have inspired you?
I think a bit of it is just the 2010s zone was very like maximalist to me. I feel like both in my own stuff and in the band stuff, it was just like it's really dense kind of sounding stuff from Centipede Hertz through Painting With. Even though they're different, there's different aesthetics. I feel like there's still sort of this desire to just like pack the sound field full of stuff. Grim Reapers, same thing. And I think it was just us sort of being done with that for a minute, just wanting to like try something else and see where it went.
And having done a second record, with those aesthetics and vibes in mind, do you still feel kind of like drawn to that currently, or do you think that, things might get more maximal from here?
Well, I don't imagine they'll get more maximal, but who knows?
But yeah, I mean, I think that, it is, I mean, I think you get this, but in so many ways, like the two records they're not the same record, but it was all written and arranged in the same period of time. So it's not like it was like, we've made a record and like, let's do another record like that. Like it literally was us still just working on the same music. So, to me, this sort of, we've sort of reached the end of this particular chapter that kind of started with like the show that we played in New Orleans in 2018 and ended with this release. Those are kind of like the bookends of this era. And I think we're kind of back into like who knows what's next, so it's a little hard to say like what the next thing will be, whether it'll kind of feel like, okay, I would say it's very unlikely that it will be once again, like Dave will just play bass. And this, I think probably some sort of shift will happen in the next one. And, I probably agree with Noah. It would be surprising if it went to a back to a maximalist place, but I don't think there's really any way of knowing.
I guess like regardless of where things end up going, if you guys wouldn't mind sharing, like how do you feel like at this point band dynamics are going to dictate it, and how radically have band dynamics kind of shifted over the years in terms of like how you guys make music together? What is the process by which things are agreed upon, in terms of like, this sounds good, this doesn't sound good, this song goes out, this song doesn't go out, here's a song we finish, here's a song that, maybe we go back to later. It just kind of seems like with a discography that has this almost ever shifting, sort of like, some artists are on this record, some, members are not on this record. On this record, certain people are taking the lead on this record. Other people have a role that they didn't have before. It's like, how exactly do you guys end up coming to these decisions? Is it a democratic process? Is there a hierarchy? Is it a parliamentary system? Like, how exactly do these kind of, decisions end up getting like filtered?
Well, usually the biggest one is if you kind of write the demo or sort of like the seed of the song, you kind of get to sort of say how, if you don't like something or you feel like it's not right or it's not kind of going where you want it to go. But overall, I feel like all of us have to be into the thing at the end. And if we're not, we talk about it and kind of gets changed until everybody feels like it's good to go. And that's to say there isn't always songs that get to that point. There's a lot of songs that just kind of bit the dust. But I think it's important to us that we all feel good about the thing. I don't think there's been a single thing we've released that everybody wasn't on board for, as far as I can remember.
Does approaching...
I think that the development of each kind of era, I think to me has felt pretty similar for all the eras that I've been involved in. There's sort of like some sort of a period in whatever form of like an attempt to purge what happened before. And sometimes that's kind of somewhat drastically, like in a short period of time. Like I think, but Noah can speak better to this. Like I think between Strawberry Jam and Merriweather, like, I mean, we were recording Strawberry Jam and those guys were already starting to kind of, think about Merriweather. And so that was like a very like close one. But then you have something like the gap between Painting With and Time Skips where there was like a lot of space. or the gap between Merriweather and Centipede. Like we had like a year, between those things. So there's this sort of like purging time where we really just let everything be kind of fallow and let people like kind of do their own thing and don't really have direct conversations about even if there's going to be a next thing. Like there's not, maybe there'll be a vague, like maybe in a year or so, like we'll start talking about stuff. And then there's just sort of this like initial period where I think people start kind of just having kind of mellow, casual conversations about things that they're thinking about, or maybe like share a demo or something. And just, you start to feel a sense of momentum catching or something.
Somebody gets excited about something. And then
it just kind of catches. And then the things that catch in that process, like whether it be, who's going to be involved this time or who's going to write songs, like, oh, Josh has songs, like that's obviously a new thing in the last, 10 years.
Right.
Like those things catch because they catch. It's kind of like Noah saying, like everyone has to feel good about it. So people just start sort of presenting different ideas or show up with a certain instrumentation or a new sound palette or whatever. And it's just like, if people are like, yeah, that feels like, let's do more of that. That's cool. Or no, like that doesn't feel good. Like, can you try something different? Like we just kind of work it out. So it's, I don't know whether it's democratic or it's sort of a mixture of all these things. Because as Noah says, there are moments of hierarchy. There are certainly like moments where, because someone wrote a song or whatever, where someone might kind of pull rank a little bit, but it's not like any one of us would ever like, just be like, I am the king of what we do for this next, 3 years. There's something a lot more kind of organic that I think we've just learned to trust over the years. And it's really kind of foundational to how it all came together to me, like going all the way back, like
That's not to say that it's
release.
Always easy too. Sometimes it's definitely not easy. I mean, nobody likes to be told like what you're doing that's not right.
Well,
it takes some noodling sometimes.
Speaking to that and the process that you were just kind of talking about, does it create many, if any, situations where, you are kind of like bringing together things that you've been working at, and not that anything is wrong per se, but you end up finding like creatively, me right now, I'm just in a way different place than you are. How are we going to kind of bridge this gap and end up making it a record that sounds cohesive? Because I mean, again, given how you've been talking about what you've been saying, it's surprising that all the albums come out as consistent as they do, given that everybody's kind of like coming at it with a different, maybe idea, and then you kind of bring it to the center and all make it, come together harmoniously, at least in an aesthetic way.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard. I mean, I'm not sure all of us would say this, but Strawberry Jam definitely felt like one of those moments where we were all kind of on different pages. And
yeah, it was a tough one.
We did our best to kind of rein it in, but I don't know. I feel like things weren't, it wasn't the most harmonious time for us creative, I would say.
And would you say that process has gotten easier at all over the years? Like, time skiffs, and isn't it now, as opposed to, Strawberry Jam, for example?
No, I wouldn't say it's easier. I'd say just sometimes you kind of get in sync with people and other times you're not.
And
I do think, not to like, I'm not contradicting Noah, because I think what he's saying is true, but I do think that there's something to credit us for like, maturation of some sort, that I think that we have kind of learned as individuals and as a group to kind of like have a little bit more patience or a little bit more trust and a little bit more openness. And it's not, there are certainly moments where things still feel just as hard as they ever did if something is really not clicking. But I think that, we've all come to realize for many years now, how important this is to us. And so I think that there's like we take it seriously. Like, we spend so much time apart doing different things that when we do kind of make the decision to come together, like it's a big decision, and there's a lot of commitment to it. And I think that we all kind of know what goes into it and put a lot of work into figuring out how to kind of balance our own egos with what other people's egos are going through, and how to kind of really get to this place that feels harmonious. Cause that's what we like when things are good, like we have a really good time together. Like the four of us love each other and it's a lot of fun. So like when things are at their best, it's just, when we wrote most of this music as a 4-piece in Tennessee in 2019, I mean, it was a 3.5 week vacation with 3 of my best friends. And I think for the most part, that's how it felt. Not to say there weren't days where like something wasn't coming together and someone needed to fucking take a walk or go sit in the room and like stew for a bit or whatever. But in general, it's like, we want to be there and want to be doing it. So I think the awareness of all of that being part of the process and learning how to kind of like actually process through the things that do feel tough. I personally think we've gotten better at that. No one might disagree, but I think that's
I agree.
Improved.
There's less dramatic practices.
And I also think that, it can't be overstated how important it is that like we are not, all of us, our musical output is not limited to what we do as a group. Everybody has stuff they do outside of it, which I think is such an integral part of what made it possible for us to keep doing this for 23 years. I think if this was the only way that each of us could express ourselves, like Strawberry Jam would have been it, like done. Like no one would want to have done it again. It just, or maybe even earlier. It's just like it didn't. I think it changes things when you kind of go into it going like, yeah, okay, this is going to be really intense for a year or 2 or 3 while we're working on this era, whatever it is. But like, I've also got other stuff that I've done that I can kind of like, there's another way I can express myself, or there's going to be some side project that's going to have a different feeling. I think that makes it a lot different than if we were just like, this is the band, this is the instrument you play every time we get on stage, I'm the songwriter, this is, it's just like, if that's how it worked, I don't think we would have the flexibility to be able to keep doing this. So it's yeah.
I mean, all those things that you're talking about have shifted massively, and you guys are in a very different place, every member of the band personally, since when the group started. Some of you have like moved to different places and have had kids, different relationships. Like, how has that proven to, I guess, like impact band dynamics over the years? Like, have these things, for you creative and personally in any way, been obstacles to move around, or have they more served as like maybe more points of inspiration to work from when making new material?
All of the above, I would say. The one that really sticks out for me is when I moved to Portugal from New York. We weren't, especially Dave and I, because we used to live together, we worked at the shop together, and we would go to practice every night. So we were around each other pretty much every second of every waking day. And I think when I moved here, it kind of like allowed us to breathe a little bit in a way that I think all of us felt like was good for the group. But that's the one that sticks out most for me.
But in general, it's that ability to be able to kind of like allow each other to kind of have our own individual lives is Noah's thing being kind of like the first example where we were like, oh, this was like, we almost thought that was like the end. We weren't really making money yet as a band, so there was like, what are we going to do if Noah's literally is like a $1,000 plane flight away? And but it worked. And then I think like through realizing that it actually felt healthier when people had space, it just made it easier to kind of allow for all these things to keep kind of evolving in people's lives. And exactly what you said, like it is inspiration. It is because suddenly Dave is spending, 5 years living in LA, that changes his perspective on his day. And that changes the way that he writes music. And that affects what, we end up doing when we get together. And, so, yeah, I think it has a mostly positive impact.
As you were just kind of alluding to, how else has that kind of like flipped the creative process on its head? Because now with, everybody being, at a fair distance from each other, it sounds like, like you were saying with the material you created for these new records, like now when we're getting into the process of an album, we need to plan a time, all meet at a place. It needs to be within a certain amount of weeks. Like, is that essentially what the album creation process has become? Or are there other elements of it where maybe there's like, some digital collaboration over email, or we're like, sort of putting together projects over the internet and stuff like that? Or is it mostly just like in person and we're kind of like prioritizing it for a certain period of time?
It seems like it's mostly kind of slipped into a groove of way more extensive demo making. Everybody kind of makes their songs on their own, or at least like a skeleton of a song, so that when we get together, because usually we're not together for that long, there's already kind of like a springboard for the thing, and then we just sort of try to figure out the arrangement, and we don't always get it, but I feel like that's typically how it goes for us now, at least for the past 10 years or so.
And, do you see that kind of, is that just like kind of functioning as is, or are there any kind of like, tension about the way things are currently working that you see might change at some point with the next record or the one after that?
I don't think so. I mean, the system feels pretty like it works pretty good for us. I don't know that anybody has a big problem with it, but also I feel like you never know. Like things could change a lot, and it could be totally different 5 or 6 years from now. I could see one of us being like, I just can't work like this anymore. We gotta like all be, we gotta live in the same city again. Who knows?
Or the changes can be more, I mean, like Centipede Hurts is an example where that was a record where we chose to not really demo it in advance, and we, rather than demo it in advance, we figured out a way to all be in the same place for 3 months to write it, because we just were like, what would happen if we just showed up and had our instruments and just started writing together? And that didn't mean that people didn't have songs they'd written, but instead of it being like, I sent you this demo and you've been able to mess around with it for a month and a half, it's, hey, I'm going to play the song for you right now. And like, let's just start jamming and see like where it goes, which is, we hadn't done that in a long time. So that wasn't like it wasn't a matter of it having been a problem of the way it had been working. It was just wanting, like with everything, we always choose like a new geographical location to kind of center ourselves around spiritually or physically, or a new instrumentation to center ourselves around, or a new kind of like set of guidelines. And that's just one of them. So it's not always necessarily a reaction to something in a negative way. It's just like what could we do this time that would feel like a new possibility, or, just, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we try to stay allergic to like getting stuck in a rut. And there's a variety of ways that we try to like keep ourselves from doing that, but switching things up, and whether it's instruments or what we write songs on, or something like that with Centipede Hurts, where it's like, hey, we haven't written songs all together in the same room in a while. Let's see what happens when we do that. And
or Centipede Hurts was like no harmonies on Centipede Hurts, which I don't think we 100% stuck to, but for the most part, that was like just like a new rule. Like we've just done like a couple eras of like a lot of harmony, no more harmony,
Like, let's see what happens. I feel like when you put yourself in a situation where you're not totally familiar or confident creatively, that's tends to be where things kind of grow. And I'm not saying you kind of nail the target every time, but at least it like takes you. It's a step on the way to like where you want to get to.
Josh, to what you were just saying, like to what extent do you feel like you guys push yourselves, or does it even make sense to push yourselves in that way to like, kind of not repeat yourselves too much, or as Noah was saying, stay allergic to getting in a rut? Because, with so much back catalog at this point, I'm sure, in almost every moment you could be like, oh man, that was like something we did in 2003, or, oh no, that was like something that we did in 2010. It's like, I'm sure at this point that you could cycle in that circle forever. There has to be some point where you kind of break that and you're like, no, okay, even if we've done something sort of like this before, we have to let it go just for the sake of getting something together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of true, but I think we still try and keep the same mentality. I mean, we're not like so obsessive about it that I think I've come to realize at a certain point, it's like, Dave has like a huge range of types of songs that he writes, but I'm like, I know what a Dave song sounds like. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing an acoustic guitar or, with a synthesizer, I know what Dave's song sounds like, but same with Noah. But I also feel like I've come to trust that we continue to surprise each other with new ideas. And I think the only way we're able to do that is by kind of creating these thoughtfully going into things in this sort of the way Noah's describing, throwing yourself into some sort of a deep end allows for the possibilities of something new. I think you're right. I think at a certain point you have to recognize like, Dave does sound like Dave and Noah sounds like Noah, and I'm starting to sound like me. And, Brian has what like, we all have these things that we do, but I think that it's, it continues to feel important to me to do something to put yourself in that place of instability where you're needing to kind of like take the training wheels off and figure out how to do this new thing. I think that sort of is a foundational part of our process. That there'll always be some version of that. I don't know what it will look like every time, but yeah, I think that's always going to be there.
It's weird because there's bands that I like a lot that seem to have just kind of find their thing and then just do that thing or sort of iterate on that thing. But for whatever reason, it's just not how we get down.
You were alluding to earlier, Josh, kind of the necessity, and you know as well, for having these different creative outlets outside of Animal Collective. I know that, you know, you can't speak to this in Brian and Dave's case at the moment, but, you know, for both of you currently, personally, what is, you know, solo outlet, you know, output prospects, you know, looking like it at this moment? And, you know, maybe Noah doesn't have the boldest answer to this at the moment, given you just came out with a new record. But, you know, are either of you kind of like working on some solo stuff as of right now that fans might see, you know, soon?
He does have the boldest answer.
Oh, does he?
Do I?
Well, I mean,
Josh and I are going to record some of my new stuff in a month.
Okay.
yeah. I'm heading out to Portugal in November to sort of engineer.
So there's already plans in place.
Next record. Yeah.
I
do have a what's that now?
I just can't stop. I mean, maybe I shouldn't release stuff anymore, but just like the making of stuff is for so long been kind of how I get from one day to the next, that I can't. If I don't do it, I start to get really cagey, and maybe I should stop releasing stuff.
Well,
I have come to learn the same thing for myself, but as sure anyone who's paying attention to me, I also have an incredibly hard time following through with things. So I'm at a place right now where I probably have at least an album and a half worth of like partially or fully demoed or written songs. And my intention was to finish that this year. The year is coming to a close, and it looks like I'm going to help Noah make his record first. But that's kind of like,
sorry, everybody.
Son of a bitch.
My bad.
But I'm working on that too, and Dave and Brian and I are actually playing some shows in November where we're each going to play solo sets, just a couple. So it's kind of pushing me to sort of put a little bit more finishing touches on some of the stuff that I've been writing, and yeah, like that's outside of just working in general and whatever. That's kind of my highest priority is getting a new record done in the next 4 months. Let's say 4 months. I'm gonna do it in the next 4 months.
Okay.
I'm famous for publicly telling people what my deadlines are and then following through with them. So you guys can bank on that one.
You know, I guess since there's that announcement's gotten a strong reaction from chat. I mean, you know, if you can say generally or specifically, like, you know, to what do you know, attribute some of these stoppages? You know, is it sort of like a personal hesitance, or do you feel like maybe you take more of a perfectionist approach, or, you know, like how do you feel like your process or the way you finalize a project differs from Noah, for example? You know, I mean, in terms of like how you approach putting something out, and, you know, yeah, I mean, given your different levels of output.
Yeah, I aspire to be more like Dave and Noah. They've always been really like inspirational in that way, and that they just sort of don't really have a whole lot of resistance between, or at least they seem to know how to overcome it in a much bigger way. I think the easiest answer is I have a lot of I guess I would describe it as a mental health thing. I mean, I have a lot of fear and anxiety, and at times kind of crushing depression around these things, and I get into like ruminative thinking about what I want to be doing or could be doing that so overpowers my capacity to be able to kind of like engage with things. And I've learned over the years, in no small part, working with Animal Collective and starting to bring my songs to it, that as soon as I just actually engage with things, it goes where I want it to go. And I'm learning how to trust myself. But the truth is I mean, I feel it's sort of funny to say these things publicly, but it's the truth. I get really tied up in knots to a point where I just will kind of shut down and avoid things because, yeah, it's a perfectionist thing. It'll never be good enough thing. It's you know, this, that, or the other. And so I'm really grateful for, the band, because I think that when I'm in a room with them or in any sort of process, I feel an obligation to them to show up and to engage. And when I do, I'm like, oh, I make stuff that I love. So this is like, I don't know what my hesitation is. It's a little bit harder to do it on my own. It's been a lot harder to do it on my own, but now it's easy, much easier. Now it just comes down to like, it's really like scheduling. It's like, just my life feels like fuller than it's felt in a long time, and whatever. But yeah, it's very much, it's a mental process, and it's a challenging one for me. So
no, there's absolutely nothing funny or strange about coming forward with that at all.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, but I feel like in depression, like the only way you can ensure that you stay depressed is by not doing anything. I feel like, at least in my life, any sort of action takes me out of it, and it's that
100%.
like consistent movement that eventually kind of like brings me out of the thing. That's just in my experience.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Considering that, to like rewind on, obviously, you know, a project like Sleep Cycle, you know, when you got to a point where you had that material and you were about to put that album out, and you did, you know, and it came out, like, was that process and finishing it like a weight off your shoulders? Did you break through something, or was it like, you know, the manifestations of like a worst nightmare kind of situation?
I was both, actually. It was utterly terrifying. I did it at kind of like about as low a point in my life as I could possibly get. I felt completely defeated, crushed, and I was 100% certain that when people heard it, they would laugh at me. That is, I'm not lying. I just was like, this is garbage, but I have to do this because I had put myself in a situation publicly that felt shameful and it just, whatever. It was like, I have to do this. And I was driven to do it. And I was really fortunate to have a few people in my life that sort of championed me and kind of, I mean, obviously everyone in the band, but Brian specifically had this moment with me where he was just like, dude, you just got to set a date. Just set a date. Cause I'd been fighting with it for years. And you just need to just say a date, and whatever is done at that point, that's your record. And if you hate it, it doesn't matter. You just have to do it. And he was really right. And I kind of held to that. Pete Kember also was somebody who was really championing me and actually like writing to me a lot and helped me with a couple mixes on the record. But I was a total fucking mess. But through that, yeah, I had some like really crazy breakthroughs. Like I had these moments where I would, I mean, a really prime example for me is the first song on that record, Golden Chords, which I had been playing live in some form for like 4 years at that point. It had always been this like really aggressive, like crazy guitar effect. My vocals like kind of pretty shouty behind a lot of delay, but some sort of core of it was always there. And I really was kind of like broken down. And it sounds a little dramatic, but like sitting in the place where I was living, and I just tried doing it with an acoustic guitar, singing softly, which I didn't even know I could sing that way. Like I had never given myself the chance to do that. And I did it, and I sat back and listened, and a little part of me was like, I actually think this is maybe the best way the song could go, or this is the best way you could do this. And sort of, I think, started to feel some sense of like, yeah, it's sort of dual mind. Part of me was like, this is garbage. Everyone's going to laugh at me. This is the evidence of why I'm not part of, different eras of the band, because I actually suck. And another part of me being like, wait, there's something here. So it was both. It was a really, yeah. I mean,
have any
my
of those
mental health was real bad at that time.
Have any of those, sort of like reservations or voices in your head been like, disproven in your own mind, or been maybe sort of like diminished with? And I don't know how much of this you've been exposed to, but like, I would say, at least from my perspective, when you're taking into account all of the Animal Collective solo stuff, that is one of the best received Animal Collective solo albums, So, I mean, has that
I mean, not that's true, but thank you.
No, I mean, I think it's certainly true. I mean, I think that album gets engaged with quite a bit. And, I think, I'll just leave it there. I'll say it's one of the better received solo records in my perspective, from everything that I've seen in terms of like certain reactions to certain albums, be they negative or be they sometimes even non-reactions. I think that album solo wise, for all of your output, collectively as a group, had got quite a bit of engagement upon release and quite a bit of positive engagement. And, knowing that, does that sort of like, make you feel differently about it in any way? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I say this cautiously because I do think that there's like a danger zone you can get with this, but I absolutely, I think that I very much, I think in a way that feels positive to me, fed off the validation of that. It was shocking to me when people first started reacting, like literally from the moment people heard it for the first time. And I was like, wait, people like this? Through everything that you're talking about and getting, getting a lot of direct communication from certain fans that it's meant a lot to. And yeah, it's absolutely. I think it's made me that, along with sort of feeling like I can share songs with Dave, Noah, and Brian and feel like they can get behind them as strongly as anything that we've done. I think those two things are both versions of validation that have definitely like changed the way that I view myself, because I have such a terrible self view that it actually started to feel helpful to sort of be like, okay, well, if this person who I respect is saying this, rather than me discounting it because that's what my mind wants to do, maybe I should, like, I like Noah and I like his taste. And so if he's saying he likes this, maybe something's up. Like, he's not just like, you know, fucking with me. So it was very helpful in that regards for me to start to kind of rewire the way that my brain works around that stuff. Cause it continues to be pretty, fraught, but I think that I have a better balance to it now. Like, I kind of have this other voice that I can balance off of. So
yeah. And
long-winded.
So
yes.
crucial, though.
What's that, Noah?
I said that first step is so crucial, though. It's so important. Like, you don't get any of the rest of it without taking that first action. So anybody out there, if you're stuck in a rut, get moving.
And I imagine as well, as you've been saying, sort of like, you know, submitting your own songs to the band more and having your own songs sort of like appear more on these records. I mean, does that, in an exposure therapy kind of way, like, you know, dampen the tension and the anxieties around kind of getting your voice out there artistically more?
100%. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's certainly a confidence booster, you know, when you have to, I mean, it's funny to think about I mean, I'm just laughing at the direction the interview's gone, but, you know, when I think about the difference between when I introduced Wide Eyed for Centipede Hurts, and I don't know, there was Dave or Noah or who suggested that like we open the first show we played with it. And I just was like, Jesus Christ, I've just come off like 4 years of feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. And now we were like writing music again. And I introduced one song, and you want to, like, the first show that we're going to play in like a year and a half is going to be my song. And then that actually became like a normal thing to do, to open the set with that. And I was terrified. Like, it was not easy for me to do every night, but it was just like, all right, you got to fucking do this. Like, come on. I just got myself pumped up. And it, you know, to now where I feel like, yeah, I value that I have a different voice than Dave and Noah. And I like write songs that have a different feeling than they do, but that they fit within the context of what we do. And I know that it means something to people in the audience, or certain people in the audience. And yeah, there's a different feeling of kind of like relaxation within it, that certainly makes kind of taking new steps feel a little easier. There's less resistance because there's like a foundation of trust or something that I can look to.
Yeah, and I can say, you know, live to what you were just speaking to, a lot of people are, you know, relating to much of what you just said and have, you know, gone through similar things and find what you just kind of shared inspirational. The fact that you've been able to push through that and, you know, make art that people are enjoying and just, you know, be able to kind of break through that wall in general. So, I mean, you know, but moving on, you know, considering you were just kind of mentioning the kind of a place that, you know, songs you've kind of contributed play in the live space. Like, are you guys going to be touring behind this new record soon?
We're not going to be. I think it's a sort of an unfortunate circumstance because of the pandemic, essentially. I mean, we wrote all this music in 2018 and 2019, with the exception of Soul Capture. Everything was ready to go in 2020. We were going to record all of it. We would have put a record out and probably some EPs and been touring for a couple of years. And just because of the, you know, what we're not able to record remotely in 2020, that had to wait until 2021, which meant a whole second record that didn't come out until a couple of weeks ago or whatever it's been. We've been sitting with this music for 5 years. And I think going back to everything that we were talking about earlier in the interview about like kind of the necessity for us to sort of like not get stuck in ruts and not feel like we're, you know, I think we kind of realized we reached that point where if we had to tour this music for another, you know, 10 months or 18 months or whatever it would have been to kind of like properly do this record justice, I think we kind of know ourselves well enough to know that we would have been kind of burning out or starting to kind of feel fatigued. It's been a really joyous for the most part few years of like touring these songs and playing them, getting to record them, and it just felt like it's time to kind of leave that kind of that fallow ground to kind of leave space for actually what's next, rather than just stay cycling the same material. which I think is what would have happened. So
you guys made the music, it was done, you wanted to put it out, it pretty much had to come out, but because of the delays, there's almost like, you know, you're in a different place than the music. So you guys feel like touring behind it, you're just in a different spot now. It wouldn't make sense.
Yeah. I mean, we got in the studio to record the stuff that's on Isn't It Now in December of 2021 and then spent all of 2022 touring. Is that right?
Right.
Or am I 1 year off? But you know what I mean? Like, so we toured all of it for a year. I mean, essentially. So we were, you know, and I think, and we'd been working on it for a year and a half previous to that. And the only reason we weren't touring with it is because we couldn't, because of the pandemic. I mean, we did one short tour in,
I mean, we played Defeat like 300 times.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys coming through. I don't want to take any more time. You've already given me so much. And, you know, I thank both of you for being open books and really just like kind of sharing a range of everything about the group, about the new record, just about it all.
Of course. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Appreciate it. You're very, very thoughtful conversation. Appreciate it.
You know, aside from the new album being out, and obviously you guys said, you know, you're not going to be performing behind the material, the new stuff anytime soon. Is there anything else that, you know, we should be looking out for around the corner immediately, or are you just kind of like back in creating new music mode at this point and going to kind of lie low until that stuff is ready?
Well, Dave and Brian are on tour currently, so go see them. A.B. Terra and Geologist.
Well, no, I think their last show was last night, so they're done. The tour's over, but.
check out those bootlegs.
check out the tour bootlegs.
But yeah, we're kind of in like solo mode, and like Noah has shows coming up, and like we said, we're about to do his new stuff, and probably I'm going to record stuff this winter. And we've been doing more like film score work over the last few years, especially Brian and I, but Dave as well at times. Noah's not really that into it. I think we may have another score that we might start working on this winter, which oftentimes end up becoming releases like Crestone did. So there'll probably be a lot of that kind of stuff. And yeah, I think the kind of like at whatever point we have one kind of like EP idea that's sort of collaborative that I won't talk about, but that we're hoping will be a cool thing. Yeah. So yeah, we always kind of have like our eyes open for like what feels like a cool thing to put energy into, but there's no like big plan or big reveal for AC output in the immediate future, but I'm sure it'll come at some point.
Noah, film scores not as interesting?
I just don't feel like I'm very good at it, and it's a type of I feel like the dynamic of trying to kind of please somebody else. This sounds really bad, but I don't feel like I'm very good at it. I get really frustrated, and I feel like I'm just taking shots in the dark, and I just don't feel like I'm very good at it.
All right. Well, again, I appreciate you guys coming through. Thanks for giving me the time, and thanks for talking about the new record and all of it. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, thank you. Likewise. Really appreciate it.
Have a good one.